Welcome everyone to our very first report launch of the year. My name's Nicola Matheson. I'm the Research Director here at the Global Network on Extremism and Technology. GINA is the academic arm of the Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism, so GIFCT, and we're a part of the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College London. Now, this is very exciting. We have a lot of people signed up to this event today, so I will keep the introductions short. But just so you all know, we'll record the presentation section of the event, and then we'll turn off recording for the Q&A. So we'll have 30 minutes presentation, 30 minutes Q&A. And the report we have today is by the wonderful Stuart, Macdonald and Andrew Staniforth, and it's on tackling online terrorist content together, cooperation between counterterrorism law enforcement and technology companies. So Stuart is a professor of law at the Hillary Rodham Clinton School of Law, Swansea University, and the director of the university's Cyber Threats Research Centre, or CITRAC. Stuart is also the lead organiser of the biennial Terrorism and Social Media Conference and coordinator of VoxPol, and a member of the steering committee of Europol's Advisory Network on Terrorism and Propaganda. And Andrew Staniforth is the director of the innovation at SAHER. Is that how you pronounce the acronym, Andrew?
That's perfect, thank you.
Perfect. And a research development officer at CITRAC at Swansea also. As a former UK Special Branch Intelligence Officer and Counterterrorism Police Detective with 25 years of operational experience, Andrew has worked in 22 countries and has supported missions of the United Nations Terrorism Prevention Branch. So I'm going to hand it over to Stuart and Andrew to talk about their report. There's the Q&A box if you have any questions as you go along. And then I will open it up for discussion at approximately 5:30. So please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much to Nicola and to GNet for the opportunity to present our report this evening. I've worked in this area for roughly a decade now, and one line that I've heard a lot during that time is multi-stakeholder collaboration is essential. I've heard it from governments, I've heard it from tech companies, I've heard it from law enforcement, I've heard it from NGOs, and I've heard it from academics. And in fact, I think I've probably said it quite a lot myself. But at the same time, I know that collaboration across different sectors is not straightforward. Criminal justice research in other areas has found some quite significant obstacles to partnership working that need to be overcome. So having heard people emphasize the importance of multi-stakeholder collaboration in tackling online terrorist content, we wanted to explore the challenges to partnership working in this particular context. In the report, we focus specifically on two sectors, law enforcement and tech companies. There have been some high-profile instances of non-cooperation between the two, such as the Apple FBI debate. But there have also been instances of close cooperation, such as the referral action days organised by the EU's Internet Referral Unit. So the report tries to offer a glimpse into these collaborative efforts from the perspective of those involved. Now, it's also worth noting that broader concerns have been raised about the informality of some existing collaborations. Some have warned of potential mission creep. Some have warned of a lack of accountability and oversight. So here the report tries to offer some empirical basis for assessing the extent to which these concerns might be justified. So the plan for the presentation is to begin with a word about methodology, then we'll work through 4 sets of findings before offering some recommendations. And the recommendations try to speak to this central challenge, how to overcome the obstacles to collaboration between law enforcement and tech companies, how to overcome these challenges, whilst also trying to address these concerns about informality, mission creep, and oversight. So Andy is going to say a bit about the methodology.
Yes, thank you, Stuart. And first of all, thanks to everybody for taking the time to join us this afternoon or this morning, wherever you're from. A warm welcome to you all. Okay, so how did Stuart and I approach this piece of research? Well, to understand how law enforcement and tech companies coordinate to tackle online terrorist content, we conducted semi-structured interviews of professionals from 4 key sectors: from law enforcement, from tech companies, from NGOs, and from subject matter experts. Our research methodology had 3 core stages, following the ethical approval from Swansea University. And those core stages included participant selection, interview structure, and data coding and analysis. So let's dive into participant selection. Well, to produce authoritative outcomes from our research, it was important to include a mix of law enforcement agency practitioners working in the field from different jurisdictions and also, importantly, across their hierarchical structures. The law enforcement personnel who we interviewed spanned 6 counterterrorism roles, and they included the most senior national leaders in counterterrorism, heads of intelligence departments and units, internet referral units, team leaders, analysts, investigators, and also training coordinators. Now, to capture the views of tech companies, we reached out to a range of experts from the tech sector as this was considered a priority. We also reached out to professionals with legislative, regulatory, and public policy expertise, as they were also considered to have important insights that might inform our research. These interviews were augmented by others with representatives from NGOs that provide the support, the guidance, and training to stakeholders across the specialist online harms landscape. In total, we interviewed 21 participants. 10 were from law enforcement, 5 were from the tech sector, 3 from NGOs, and 3 subject matter experts. The participants were located in 7 countries, and the 10 law enforcement participants were located in 5 of these countries, adding an important international dimension which reflects the borderless transnational nature of the threat from online terrorist content. Now, moving on to the interview structure, the interviews were conducted online and they were recorded. They were set within a semi-structured framework, which was designed not only really to ensure consistency of approach, but also to elicit the responses required to inform the research, and also to allow flexibility and autonomy for the interviewer and the interviewee to delve deeper into matters that concern them from their own experiences. Data analysis and coding. All of the interviews were then transcribed, and to begin data analysis, both Stuart and I analysed the 21 interview transcripts to construct a thematic coding framework. The interview transcripts were then coded by theme, from which a series of findings then emerged. Stuart, next slide, please. So I'm just going to introduce the first finding, because our published paper and presentation today, as Stuart has already mentioned, focuses on 4 themes of relevance to cooperation between law enforcement and the tech sector arising from our research. Now, the first theme is the importance that all participants attached to tackling online terrorist content having a shared understanding of the threat. Our participants were unanimous in emphasising the importance of tackling online terrorist content, with comments specifically from law enforcement, which included the ones on the screen on the slide. There isn't much that goes on these days when it comes to serious crime or terrorism that doesn't have a significant technology component. And also, almost every single individual that we charge and prosecute has a mountain of this material on their devices when they are arrested. And also a common understanding and a common belief that the threat is growing and the problem is becoming more acute. Now, as professionals tasked with tackling online terrorist content, it perhaps is unsurprising that our selected participants emphasise the scale and importance of this task, but they did highlight other key challenges, including our participant that commented, proving a causal link between media and actual violence is very, very difficult. So in summary, all participants shared an understanding of the threat, the challenges they face, and how important it was to tackle online terrorist content. So Stuart, over to you for more insights on the research findings.
Thanks, Andy. So moving on to the second set of findings, this focuses on the progress to date. So as Andy's indicated, the interviewees consistently emphasised the progress that had been made. But at the same time, they acknowledged that the picture hasn't always been quite so positive. There was a time not so long ago that the relationship between these two sectors was more difficult. And there were three reasons that were identified for these initial challenges, these initial difficulties. The first was different ideological cultures. So on the law enforcement side, counterterrorism agencies tended not to engage with others, whilst the tech sector's commitment to free speech meant that it was resistant to intervention. The second reason was procedural. There weren't established channels for communication or for cooperation, and this caused uncertainty. Law enforcement said that they didn't feel sure about quite basic things, such as who to make contact with from within the companies. And then the third reason was differing expectations. Law enforcement had previous experience of working with telephone communication companies, and the expectation was that technology companies would engage in the same way. So when this didn't happen, there was some confusion and disappointment. So together, these three challenges resulted in some misunderstanding and some mutual frustration. It was around 2013 to 2015 that things began to change, our interviewees felt. And it was in particular because of the presence that Islamic State were managing to maintain at that time on social media. Many will remember that around that time, IS was managing to maintain quite a large and stable presence on social media such as Twitter. And this led to a couple of things happening. The first was that the biggest tech companies began to scale up their efforts to remove online terrorist content. This included investment in automated tools, and it included the recruitment of subject matter expertise, which importantly included the recruitment of individuals from a law enforcement background. And then second, law enforcement started to deliver specific training on cooperation with social media companies. These specific training packages included understanding tech companies' procedures and understanding tech companies' perspectives. So this was the first catalyst for change at IS's online presence. Interviewees felt that the Christchurch attacks of 2019 were also quite important. Some interviewees described how a member of Facebook travelled to New Zealand soon after the attacks and worked within the major operations centre there. And this was described as being a huge help to the investigators. In fact, one interviewee stated that it shifted our relationship from one that was transactional to one that was transformational. So overall, there was a sense that significant progress has been made. But it is worth pointing out, I think, that both of those catalysts for greater cooperation involved widespread political, media, and public concern about terrorists' exploitation of social media platforms. So the impression from the interviews was that outcry on that scale was necessary to overcome institutional inertia. Moving on to the third set of findings, and these concern current challenges. So whilst significant progress has been made, according to our interviewees, they did still agree that challenges remain. So on the law enforcement side, two key issues were identified. The first was the time that it can take sometimes for requests to be resolved. Interviewees described how they would sometimes submit a request, and then start receiving a series of requests from the tech sector for further information. So they described this as like a process of negotiation. And they said this negotiation could sometimes go on for weeks, by which time the initial request might no longer be of any relevance. Now, it's interesting to us that law enforcement interviewees showed some empathy here. They talked about how tech companies need to think about the reputation of the company. They also need to think about the possible repercussions if they take content down incorrectly. But they also felt that there were some other reasons why companies can be slow to respond. They said that companies may lack the capacity to deal with requests promptly. And they said that this is not just the case for small companies. Some interviewees felt that the content moderation teams at the biggest companies don't have sufficient capacity either. It was also felt that there are some other companies who are simply not motivated to remove online terrorist content. And so some interviewees talked about how some US-based companies seek to use the First Amendment to justify refusing to remove terrorist content. So that was the first concern that was expressed by law enforcement. The other concern that law enforcement expressed was a perceived failure to incorporate safeguards into the design of new technologies. So as an example, one interviewee pointed to fully end-to-end encrypted services. And this interviewee asked, why would you want to do that when you know you have the technical capability not to? So those were some of the challenges from the perspective of law enforcement interviewees. From the tech sector perspective, the main concern that was expressed was the content of some referrals. They said that some referrals have only a tenuous connection to terrorism, or sometimes have no connection to terrorism at all. It was suggested that referral mechanisms are sometimes used to try and get content removed that might be offensive, but is not necessarily terrorist. And this was blamed on a lack of training. Related to this, tech sector interviewees also expressed concern about the process by which referrals are made. They suggested that there is a lack of independent oversight, and they felt that there is a lack of transparency around the referrals that are made and around the parameters for law enforcement to make referrals. I think it's worth just quickly pointing out the connection between this concern on the tech sector side and the first of the law enforcement concerns. One of the reasons for the delay that law enforcement talked about, one of the reasons for this delay seems to be a feeling on the part of the tech companies that they need to scrutinize and investigate the requests that they receive very carefully. So I think there is a connection there between these concerns. The fourth and final set of findings concerns next steps. So a strong theme that came across in the interviews was the priority that our interviewees attached to increasing mutual understanding. Each sector has different objectives. Each sector faces different challenges. And so interviewees urged that an understanding of each other's situation is crucial. And there were three specific measures that were suggested to try and achieve this increase in mutual understanding. The first was clear channels of communication. So having a named person or a named department to deal with makes it much easier to build up good working relationships. The second step was greater information sharing. So law enforcement do currently provide briefings to the tech sector, but according to our interviewees, these briefings don't offer very much that isn't already known. So it was felt that the sharing of more in-depth, sensitive information and intelligence, including information about ongoing operations, would lead to more dynamic partnerships. And of course, that would be subject to the necessary security clearance. And this information sharing works in the other direction. The tech sector could offer law enforcement more information about new technologies and the potential for these new technologies to be misused. And then the third step that was identified by our interviewees was dedicated training and recruitment. And this included the suggestion that tech companies could embed law enforcement colleagues in their organization, or at least offer secondments. So one interviewee remarked, maybe the next level is to actually put somebody who's still employed by the police into these organizations. It's pretty radical, but I don't see why it can't happen. And that is a good point at which I can hand over to Andy for some recommendations.
Thank you, Stuart. So I suppose we now come to the so what question. What have we learned? What can we actually suggest to resolve some of these issues and challenges arising from our findings? Well, quite clearly, while the cultures and operating practices of law enforcement and tech companies are very different, it is clear from what Stuart's just articulated there that there have been strides made towards an increasingly open and cooperative relationship in recent years. Nonetheless, such cooperation remains in its infancy and tensions still remain, and that's really important. So from a policy perspective, the challenge, therefore, is to resolve these tensions, given the value of cooperation to tackling online terrorist content, while simultaneously addressing the concerns about due process and accountability that stem from the informality of current arrangements in place. So we offer 4 recommendations in an attempt to meet this policy challenge with measures that can be implemented with immediate effect. So the first recommendation is that we suggest the development of an experience exchange program, which would afford the opportunity for identified personnel within counterterrorism policing and tech companies to be embedded within each other's counterterrorism operational functions. The purpose of the exchange is to fully embed, immerse, and expose personnel with the required security vetting and clearances to the operating cultures and practices of each other's organizations. This will serve to share knowledge, expertise, and identify opportunities for better alignment of priorities and more productive ways of working together. The second recommendation is the implementation of what we called a takedown, shutdown, counterterrorism policing protocol. Now, this will provide clarity following review of current practices for content takedown and account shutdown referrals. The protocol would reset and reform current practices with the primary purpose of achieving greater transparency between counterterrorism policing and tech companies, including clearly defined referral parameters and the introduction of independent oversight for takedown and shutdown requests. The protocol serves to ensure counterterrorism powers and partnerships are used only for counterterrorism purposes, while protecting policing from determining legality without independent oversight of takedown and shutdown referrals. The third recommendation we offer is the development of a joint upstreaming program, which in essence seeks to deliver this fundamental shift in emphasis from the removal of terrorist content online to preventing its initial publication. The upstreaming is founded upon a proactive, preventative ethos. This must include increased access and visibility of each other's threat assessments, intelligence insights, and future risk forecasting. And what is really, really important is that this has to include meaningful briefings to each other from both sides that are of operational value, that offer far greater granularity of detail that is currently provided. And finally, our fourth recommendation is the development of joint strategic research requirements. And what we mean by that is that working together, the law enforcement agencies and tech companies work together to identify and prioritize areas of mutual concern for further development and investigation through research. The research requirements can then be made available to the research and innovation community in this field, offering a unique opportunity to design, develop and deliver research, meeting the identified needs of tech companies and counterterrorism agencies to better tackle online terrorist content. These research requirements may include the provision of new artificial intelligence tools, techniques and technologies, and in-depth analysis providing an evidence base to inform policy, practice and procedure directly. So those are the four key recommendations arising from our research for the purpose of the presentation and our paper published by GNet. And I think it provides an ideal opportunity just to provide some closing remarks. Next slide, please, Stuart. So I take this opportunity to offer some remarks to close this part of the session and suggest that as the sustained threat from terrorism in all of its forms persists, a more progressive, cooperative and collaborative partnership between law enforcement agencies and tech companies must be encouraged. By adopting the set of 4 recommendations that have just been presented, they will directly support, amplify and accelerate the much needed transformation of this partnership moving forward. And this partnership is very, very important because countering contemporary terrorism in all of its forms, both in the physical and virtual domains, increasingly depends upon the cooperation and collaboration between stakeholders. No one single agency or sector operating in isolation can tackle the modern terrorist threat. Both our neighbourhood safety and our national security is stronger when all stakeholders work together, and this includes counterterrorism policing and tech companies working together to tackle online terrorist content. And I think, Stuart, unless there's any further comments from you, that I believe seeks to close our sort of formal part of the presentation, if you like. But thank you all for listening. We look forward to receiving your questions, and you know, please feel free to contact either myself or Stuart at any time after the webinar today, should you require any further questions or queries answering about this particular research. So Stuart, back to you.
Well, just to reiterate what Andy's just said, please do get in touch if you'd like to ask questions, and we look forward to the Q&A and discussion now.
Thank you, Andrew and Stuart, for such a well-timed and precise presentation of your report. Now, just in case anyone is looking for the report, everyone who registered the event was sent the PDF today, but if you do need a copy, do let us know and we'll send it through to you. So to start off the Q&A session, you have a hard-hitting question